I am Samira, and for as long as I can remember, responsibility has been my steadfast companion. Our humble abode was always a hive of activity, filled with the laughter and chaos of my two younger brothers. It intensified with the arrival of my baby sister when I was just 9. "Samira, dear, could you help with Elizabeth's diaper?" my mom would call out, her voice weary from working long double shifts. Dropping whatever task I was engaged in, I would dash to assist. This was our norm. Everyone contributed. Everyone except Elizabeth. From the outset, Elizabeth was the exception. "She's just a baby, let her be," my dad would insist, dismissing any concerns about her behavior. I observed my parents exhausting themselves daily, dad at construction sites and mom cleaning homes, to ensure we had enough to eat and could dare to dream. Caught in the middle were my brothers, Jackson and Ryan, often overshadowed by my responsibilities and Elizabeth's exemptions. At dinner, knowing glances were exchanged whenever Elizabeth's tantrums were rewarded yet again. Post-high school, I was determined to escape the relentless cycle of scraping by. My job at the local diner wasn't glamorous, but it marked a beginning. Every dime I made was stashed away in my college fund jar, hidden in my closet. At night, I'd count my savings, dreaming of the day I could enroll at the community college. My dedication didn't go unnoticed, and soon I was promoted from waitressing to managing the diner's finances. College no longer seemed an unattainable goal. I enrolled in evening classes, balancing work and studies with an unanticipated fervor. The fatigue was palpable. Many nights I fell asleep on my textbooks, only to rise at dawn for another workday. Observing Elizabeth's carefree life, sleeping till noon, skipping school, facing no repercussions, only spurred my determination to succeed. "You're going to burn yourself out," my dad cautioned one night, finding me studying past midnight. Smiling, I responded, "Maybe, Dad, but I'm going somewhere. I promise you that." My hard work paid off. I earned my college degree, which opened doors I had only dreamed of. Hired as a junior analyst at First National Bank, I poured the same tenacity into my job as I did into my studies. Within months, my supervisor commended my rapid progress, hinting at a bright future. Perhaps my knack for numbers and navigating office politics were skills honed from years of managing family dynamics. Meanwhile, Jackson and Ryan moved out, carving their paths, while Elizabeth continued her carefree existence at home. Calls from Mom about Elizabeth's escapades were frequent: late nights, transient boyfriends, faltering grades. I listened, but detachedly. That chapter of my life was behind me. I had my apartment, my career, my aspirations. Then, a call one morning disrupted everything. "Elizabeth's pregnant, and the father has left for Nevada, US, and wants nothing to do with the baby," Mom revealed, her voice tense. Clutching the phone tighter, I realized how far I'd come and how much had yet to change back home. Of course, they would help her with the baby. Elizabeth was still their precious little girl, now 17 and expecting a child of her own. I remained silent on the phone, already bracing for what I knew was coming next. "You'll help too, won't you, Samira? Come over on weekends. You're so good with children." That was the moment I began crafting a repertoire of excuses: urgent work projects, professional development courses, client meetings, anything to preserve my much-needed free time instead of caring for another child. "I don't understand you anymore," my mom lamented during a particularly tense conversation. "You used to be so helpful." "I used to be a child who had no choice but to help," I retorted. "Now, I'm an adult, with my own life." "But doesn't family work both ways, Mom? Or have you forgotten the checks I send every month that usually silence them, at least for a while?" The checks I wrote covered substantial expenses: Elizabeth's prenatal care, baby supplies, and ongoing costs. But no amount of money seemed to earn their approval. Over coffee one day, my Aunt Anna hinted at the family's whispers. "They're calling you heartless behind your back, saying you've changed, become cold." I stirred my coffee slowly, watching the cream swirl in the dark liquid. "Let them talk. They've never really understood me anyway." "You're seen as ungrateful," she continued, pressing the point. "Ungrateful? For the privilege of raising their other children? For the chance to now raise their grandchild? I've earned everything I have, Anna. Everything. That week, my promotion to senior analyst was confirmed, which bumped up my salary again. The increased checks I sent home spoke for themselves, but my boundaries remained firm. No weekend babysitting, no emergency childcare, no last-minute favors. Let them call me whatever they liked. I had spent enough of my life playing the responsible one. Between client meetings and financial reports, romance was hardly a priority, and my dating app was mostly unused until one rainy Tuesday night when Arthur messaged me. His profile was different. No boastful gym selfies, just a genuine smile. "I notice you work in finance," his message read. "I'm an investment advisor. Maybe we could bore each other with market talk over coffees." That coffee led to dinner, which blossomed into weekends together, evolving into 3 years of the kind of relationship I never thought I'd have time for. Arthur was patient and humorous, always managing to make me laugh, even after the longest days. "You know," he mentioned during a stroll in the park, "I never thought I'd find someone who gets both compound interest and my terrible jokes." Then came the proposal, simple and sweet, in my apartment over a home-cooked meal. "I can't imagine my life without you," he said, presenting the ring. I said yes before he could finish his question. Introducing Arthur to my family went smoother than expected. Even Elizabeth was on her best behavior, which felt like a minor miracle. "He's wonderful, Samira," my mom gushed after our first family dinner. "And did you see how great he is with Nathan?" She referred to Elizabeth's son, my nephew, who indeed took an instant liking to Arthur. The wedding was beautiful, and married life with Arthur started perfectly. He meshed with the family as if he'd always been a part of it, playing with Nathan for hours, seamlessly integrating into our complex dynamics. During our family visits, Arthur would teach Nathan how to throw a ball or build with blocks. Elizabeth watched these moments with a strange intensity that I didn't fully grasp at the time. "He's going to be such an amazing father," she'd remark, her smile loaded with meaning as she glanced my way. "You're so lucky, Samira." That's when the probing began, initially from my family, and then from Arthur himself. "Don't you think it's time?" he'd ask, observing Nathan scamper around our living room. "We're not getting any younger," he'd add. I'd lay out my thoughts repeatedly. "We need to be completely ready. We need our own house, not this cramped apartment. We need a solid financial cushion. But we're both in stable jobs. We're doing well financially," he'd counter. "What are we waiting for?" "The right moment," I'd insist. "We agreed, 1 child when we're fully prepared." He'd sigh and let the subject drop, yet I could sense his disappointment. At family events, I'd catch him gazing longingly at Nathan. "Your sister manages just fine," he'd occasionally remark, a hint of frustration in his voice. "My sister lives off our parents and dips into their retirement savings," I'd reply firmly. "That's not the life I want for our future child." The tension between us built slowly, almost imperceptibly, like storm clouds gathering on a bright day. You know the rain is inevitable, yet you convince yourself it's still distant. I was absorbed in climbing the next rung of my career ladder, in growing our house fund, in the meticulously planned 4-year plan. Then one Saturday, as I was spring cleaning, which inevitably meant sorting through the perennial mess on Arthur's side of the closet, I found something unsettling, a phone hidden behind his winter sweaters. It wasn't his work phone, nor his personal phone, and it was unlocked. My hands trembled as I scrolled through the messages. The first one hit me hard, from Elizabeth, "Miss you already. Can't wait till Saturday." The messages, photos, and discussions that followed were a blur of betrayal, mocking me and my career, celebrating their deceit. The timestamps revealed a months-long affair. Then one message stopped everything. "Baby's yours. The doctor confirmed today. 10 weeks. I don't remember how I got to my parents' house. I was a whirlwind of shock and rage, clutching the phone so tightly my knuckles turned white. Elizabeth was there, casually watching Saturday morning cartoons with Nathan. I slammed the phone on the coffee table, shattering the calm. Nathan was startled, and Mom quickly ushered him out. Elizabeth, unfazed, picked up the phone and scrolled through it nonchalantly. "Oh, well. I guess you know now." You're sleeping with my husband, I exclaimed. She shrugged, dismissively. We're in love, Samira. These things happen. And now, with a baby coming, Arthur and I plan to get married once you stop being difficult. Difficult? I was incredulous. I'm being difficult? Well, yes, she said, as if explaining something simple. You never really wanted children anyway. You're too caught up in your career. Arthur needs a real family. I turned to my parents, desperate for them to intervene, to denounce this betrayal. But instead, my mom sat beside Elizabeth, comforting her. Samira, try to be reasonable. Nathan needs a father figure, and Arthur is so good with him. The realization that I was standing alone against what was now my entire family was crushing. As the reality of another baby coming settled in, my voice faltered. My husband and sister are having an affair, and you expect me to be reasonable? I choked out. Dad cleared his throat uneasily. Well, you never really wanted children, honey, and Arthur. He's always wanted to be a father. Maybe this is for the best. When was the last time you cooked him dinner? Elizabeth. She'd make a good wife. I stared in disbelief at my family, all aligned against me, defending the indefensible. There was Elizabeth, visibly pregnant with my husband's child, while Mom was already fantasizing about another wedding. Dad wouldn't meet my eyes, but his stance was clear. A proper wife. I echoed, my voice hollow. Like your precious Elizabeth, who depends on you and betrays her sister? Elizabeth rolled her eyes dismissively. Don't be so dramatic, Samira. Just go back to your big office and your important meetings. Leave the family stuff to people who care about it. I barely recall the drive back from my parents' house. The world seemed surreal, as though I was observing someone else's life crumbling, not my own. When I entered our home, Arthur was in the living room, acting as if it was just another normal Saturday. Hey, honey, he greeted, moving to hug me with that familiar, now sickening smile. I stepped back, holding up the secret phone I had found. Want to explain this? His expression shifted from confusion to recognition, then to fear. Where did you find that? He stammered, clearly flustered. In our closet while cleaning. You really should find better hiding spots for your affair phones, I retorted. Samira, I can explain the messages. The photos? Or maybe how you got my sister pregnant, I demanded. He initially tried to deny it, as they often do. It's not. I mean, I didn't. But seeing the resolve in my face, he dropped the act. Fine, yes, Elizabeth and I are together, he snapped. What did you expect? You're never home. All you care about is work. When was the last time we had a real conversation about starting a family? So, this is my fault? You cheated because I wanted financial security before having kids. I shot back. You never wanted kids, not really. You always had an excuse. The house, the savings, the right time. Elizabeth wants a family. She gets what's important in life. I looked at him, this stranger with my husband's face, and felt nothing but revulsion. What's important in life is loyalty, honor, basic human decency. But I guess those aren't important to you, or my sister. Don't act all high and mighty, he retorted. You're just angry because Elizabeth's giving me what you wouldn't. The divorce papers were filed the next day. Having proof of the affair made the process swift. My brothers, Jackson and Ryan, came to help me move out. They were the only family members who stood by me. Elizabeth was always spoiled, Jackson remarked as we packed. But this is a new low. Ryan, unable to even utter her name, declared, they're dead to me, both of them. Through my brothers, I inadvertently kept abreast of updates I'd rather avoid. Arthur and Elizabeth had a quiet wedding, attended by my beaming parents. Elizabeth gave birth to a girl. Despite everything, life moved on, but without them in mind. They settled into a modest house in the suburbs. Nathan began calling Arthur Dad. Mom kept urging us to visit, clinging to the idea that we needed to be a family again. Jackson shared this with me during one of our monthly dinners. She says we need to be a family again, he relayed. We are a family, Ryan responded, raising his glass. The three of us. That's enough. I nodded, thankful for the loyalty of my brothers in a world where fidelity seemed scarce. We alone recognize that some betrayals are irreparable, some bridges permanently burned, and sometimes families are healthier apart. Years of change have shaped new lives for all of us. My new apartment was a loft with a view of the city skyline, complete with floor-to-ceiling windows, marble countertops, and ample space to showcase the art collection I had always dreamed of. The Mercedes parked in my reserved spot shone under the garage lights. I had achieved everything as planned. My brothers frequently visited, sharing snippets of news. Elizabeth and Arthur were floundering, having moved 4 times in 3 years, each home smaller than the last. But their struggles were no longer my concern. Then, on a Tuesday evening, a familiar number illuminated my phone screen. Samira. Arthur's voice came through, aged yet recognizable, tightening my stomach. Please don't hang up. I should have, but instead I listened. We need your help, he said as if he had any right to ask. Elizabeth had an accident, a compound fracture. She's had surgery, can't move, can't care for the kids, and she's pregnant again. I sat, phone pressed to my ear, wondering if this was some cruel joke. The kids need someone to pick them up from school, to watch them until I get home. Nathan's struggling to manage, and with the new baby. You thought what? My voice was eerily calm. That I would help? They're your nephews, Samira. Your family. Elizabeth can't even get to the bathroom by herself. My family? I repeated. The sister who betrayed me with my husband? That's my family? Don't be like that, he snapped, his tone now accusatory. This isn't about us. It's about innocent children who need help. Are you too selfish to care? Too selfish. I scoffed. That's rich. Coming from you? We're struggling here. His voice rose. Do you know how hard it is keeping up with the expenses of children? I'm working overtime just to keep food on the table. We can't even afford a decent place to live. Meanwhile, you're living it up in your luxury condo with your fancy car. So, this is about money? I countered sharply. Not all of us can just focus on our careers, he retorted bitterly. Some of us have real responsibilities. Must be nice, having the family you stole and no way to support them, I replied coldly. Sounds like a real dream come true. The kids need parents who didn't build their lives on betrayal. Goodbye, Arthur. I hung up mid-protest and blocked his number before he could call again. My mother's number flashing on my phone was almost as unwelcome. I answered anyway, out of some lingering habit. Samira. Mom began with that tone she used when she wanted something. We need to talk about Elizabeth. She needs help. Arthur called you, didn't he? As I paced my living room, my mother's voice came through the phone, strained and pleading. He told you about her leg, didn't he? Yes, he did, and I told him what I'm telling you. Not my problem. How can you be so cold? She's your sister, and she's struggling with 3 kids, soon to be 4. The sister who slept with my husband? That sister? I replied, my voice icy. Mom sighed heavily. That was years ago, Samira. You need to move past it. We're family. Funny how family only matters when you need something from me, I countered. Her silence was telling. We've helped her as much as we can, Mom's voice cracked, but she keeps asking for more. Money for the kids, the rent, everything. We've gone through all our savings. Your father and I. We can't keep this up. I couldn't suppress a bitter laugh. So, the golden child is finally becoming too expensive to maintain? Don't be cruel. She's never learned to. Mom's voice faltered. To what? Work? Support herself? Take responsibility for her actions? Gee, I wonder why that is. She just keeps having babies, Mom blurted out, frustration seeping through. She won't look for a job, says she's too busy with the children, but she's always asking for money, always needing something. Sounds exactly like the person you raised her to be, I said coldly. The princess who never had to face consequences. You have no right to speak to me like that. Mom's voice rose sharply. I am your mother. And whose fault is it that Elizabeth turned out this way? Who taught her that she never had to work for anything, that someone would always bail her out? We did our best, no. You did your easiest. And now you're calling me because the monster you created is too expensive to feed. You have a duty to help your family. Mom was shouting now. After everything we've done for you? I interrupted. You mean like supporting my sister when she had an affair with my husband? Or like calling me selfish for wanting financial security before having children? I don't owe you anything. I hung up before she could respond, my hand shaking with the force of years of pent-up frustration. The view from my apartment suddenly seemed like the sweetest revenge. My life, built exactly as I'd planned it, without their help or their approval. Later that evening, while I was reviewing quarterly reports, Jackson called. You'll never guess who tried calling me today. Elizabeth, I guessed, already aware that the desperation tour was making its rounds. Bingo. Wanted me to help with the kids. Maybe loan them some money until they get back on their feet, he snorted. As if they were ever on their feet to begin with. What did you tell her? The same thing Ryan told her yesterday. Some betrayals can't be undone. What she did to you wasn't just cheating, it was destroying a family. She started crying, saying we were being cruel, that family should help family. He paused. I reminded her she didn't seem too concerned about family when she was sleeping with your husband.
How did she take that?
About as well as you'd expect. Started screaming about how we're all against her, how nobody understands how hard her life is. He chuckled darkly. Guess karma finally caught up with her. 3 weeks later, Ryan brought the news I'd been expecting. They had moved in with Mom and Dad. Elizabeth, Arthur, the kids, all under one roof. The family saga continued, just without me. With a new baby on the way, Dad is turning his workshop into an extra bedroom. Mom and Dad, who are looking forward to a tranquil retirement, are now on full-time babysitting and financial support duty. While Elizabeth recuperates, Mom keeps an eye on the kids, mostly just scrolling through her phone all day. Dad is even tapping into his pension to help cover their expenses. Yesterday, Mom dropped by my place. She seemed worried and asked if I could help them out since they were feeling overwhelmed. I wasn't surprised to hear this. The following day, she showed up unannounced at my door. I hardly recognized her. She seemed visibly older and exhausted beyond just the physical. Before I could respond to her plea, I stopped her. Listen, you've made your decisions, I told her firmly. You chose to indulge Elizabeth even when she hurt me. You allowed them to move in. These were your choices. Now you have to live with them. If you show up here again, I will call the police. Are we clear? She tried to speak, but I didn't let her continue. Remember, this is the bed you made, I added, and then I shut the door on her, blocking her number, the last family contact, except for my brothers. That evening, I had dinner with Marcus, whom I'd been seeing for a few months. He knows all about the family troubles and has always been supportive without pressing me. After I shared the latest happenings, he reached out and held my hand, reminding me that family isn't just about blood relations. Sometimes, it's about the people you choose. I felt reassured as I thought of my supportive brothers and Marcus. I mentioned to Marcus that my brothers were visiting over the weekend and invited him to join. His smile was all the confirmation I needed. For the first time in a while, I felt genuinely content with where I was and the choices I'd made. The chaos at my parents' house was no longer my burden. I was focused on living my life, building my own family, and safeguarding my happiness.
My parents will be moving into this house. Could you return to your parents' home? Jimmy, my husband, said unexpectedly. What are you talking about? I don't understand, I exclaimed, staring at him, completely baffled. Even though I contribute $2,000 for monthly living expenses, what will he do without me? However, I soon realized this might be a blessing in disguise. The next day, I quickly contacted a recycling company. If my husband was plotting something, I had my ways too. What do you think you're doing? Jimmy asked, raising his voice. Huh? It's none of your business how I dispose of my own belongings, right? I replied calmly. I am Cassidy, a 32-year-old office worker. I married Jimmy quite recently. We met at a group dating event. He approached me confidently, and over time, I became attracted to him. After dating for about 2 years, he proposed to me. I was in my early 30s and eager to settle down. So when he proposed, I was thrilled. and immediately said yes. We quickly decided to meet each other's parents. When I introduced him to my parents, they were relieved to see he was a decent office worker. "Please take good care of our daughter," my father said. "Yes, I will definitely make her happy," Jimmy replied confidently. I was elated when he said that. He was fun and considerate, and I thought our married life would be wonderful. After meeting my parents, we went to greet his. That day I wish I could forget. Right from the start, his parents didn't seem impressed. "Nice to meet you, I'm Cassidy," I said politely. "Jimmy, welcome back." It must have been tough walking in this heat, right? "I have some cold drinks prepared. Sit down and drink," his mother said, completely ignoring my greeting. "Oh, I didn't realize you brought a friend." "Haha," she added, smiling awkwardly. Mom, I brought Cassidy, my fiancé," Jimmy said, trying to clear up the misunderstanding. "Oh, sorry," she laughed again. "You're so lucky to marry Jimmy." Her words stung. Was she making fun of me? We were led into the living room, and I greeted his father, but he didn't even acknowledge me. He continued talking to Jimmy, ignoring the fact that we were about to be married. They discussed family matters I couldn't follow for over an hour, leaving me out of the conversation entirely. I left that day feeling completely excluded. "Did you tell your parents we're planning to get married?" I asked Jimmy later, uneasy about their coldness. "I did," he replied, "but their unfriendly attitude lingered with me. I didn't want a meeting between both of our families, but feeling anxious, I eventually arranged one. I warned my parents beforehand about his family, and thankfully, my parents steered the conversation. His parents were still cold, but my family asked questions that drew them out, and by the end of the meal, his parents had warmed up just a little. The meeting ended on a pleasant note, and I was immensely grateful to my parents for their effort. We got married without any issues, went on our honeymoon, and officially became husband and wife. Even the little things in married life felt special since we hadn't lived together before. I felt blissful every day. "I'm home," Jimmy would say as he returned from work. "Welcome back. I made dinner," I'd reply with a smile. "What's on the menu today?" he'd ask. "It's your favorite, Jimmy." "Steak," I replied. "Steak? Awesome. I'll get changed and come right away," he'd say, clearly excited. We enjoyed our married life, finding joy in the everyday. Both of us worked, but Jimmy would sometimes cook simple meals too, which I appreciated. I had often heard that after marriage, wives bear the brunt of household chores, but that wasn't my case. I felt fortunate to have married him. However, a year into our marriage, Jimmy's behavior changed dramatically. He grew cold. At first I didn't notice, but soon our conversations dwindled. "Today something happened at work," I began, hoping for a chat. "Uh-huh," he muttered. "Are you listening to me?" I asked, irritated by his indifference. "I guess so," he responded flatly. "What kind of answer is that?" I said, frustrated. He was ignoring me completely, and over time, our conversations faded into silence. During meals, we barely spoke. The quiet became unbearable. Frustrated, Jimmy started working late more often, coming home long after I'd gone to bed. He also began going out for drinks more frequently, stumbling home drunk. I couldn't understand why our relationship had deteriorated so quickly. Had I done something wrong? Were his feelings for me fading after just 1 year? My days were filled with anxiety and confusion. One day, out of the blue, Jimmy approached me. "Hey, how about we go out to eat somewhere today?" he suggested. "What? Why all of a sudden?" I asked, surprised. "No reason. I just thought we haven't had a proper talk recently. Work's been stressful and I've been feeling down. Sorry for being so distant," he admitted. "It's okay," I said, relieved. "I was worried, but I forgive you." "Thank you," he said. "I'll try harder from now on." I was genuinely happy that Jimmy had apologized. If things had continued to spiral, we might have ended up divorcing. We went out that evening, had a lovely dinner, and shared some laughs like we used to. I began to believe we could return to the happiness we once had. Jimmy started coming home earlier, and our conversations became livelier again. I was reassured, thinking things were back to normal. In the midst of this improved mood, Jimmy made a suggestion. "There's a new apartment building coming up that's convenient for commuting. It has a beautiful interior. How about we move there? He showed me the brochure. The apartment looked lovely, just as Jimmy described. We had been living in my old apartment, which was spacious enough and comfortable. But now, a year and a half into our marriage, we thought it might be time for something new, especially if we planned on starting a family. The rent for the new apartment was $1,400 a month. It's expensive, Jimmy said, but if we each contribute $700, we can manage it. I agreed, and we signed the contract. A few months later, we moved into the new apartment. It was beautiful, spacious, and well-equipped. I loved cooking in the fully modern kitchen, and Jimmy seemed content. Our new life together felt like a fresh start. However, a month later, I noticed something troubling. Jimmy, your share of the rent hasn't been deposited into our joint account, right? I asked him. Really? I thought I had transferred it, he said casually. The payment's due soon. Please transfer it, I reminded him. Sorry, I must have spent it on other things. Can you cover this month? I'll pay you back, Jimmy said. Okay, but make sure you pay me back soon, I said. I paid the rent from my salary, thinking it was a one-time mistake. But 2 weeks passed, then 3, and Jimmy still hadn't paid me back. The next rent was due. Jimmy, you still haven't paid me back for last month's rent? Am I supposed to cover the full $1,400 again this month? That's unreasonable, I remarked indignantly, and firmly added, we agreed to split the rent. Yeah, but it's not easy, you know, he muttered, brushing it off. No, a promise is a promise. You need to stick to it, I insisted. I'm working hard, so don't be so harsh, he complained. Then set aside the rent from your salary in advance, I said, frustrated. All right, he mumbled, but I wondered if he truly understood. My trust in Jimmy dropped significantly. Besides, I was paying for all living expenses, including food and utilities. I was saving as much as possible, so even with rent, the total came to about $2,000. But it's hard to pay all that with just my salary. However, Jimmy never paid the rent again. It turned out he only paid for the first month after we moved. One day, something unforgivable happened. It was on my holiday, and Jimmy was out for work. I was cleaning the house, and as I vacuumed around, I found something in Jimmy's room. I was shocked to discover luxury brand clothes hidden away. Clothes he had never worn in front of me, so I had no idea he'd bought them. What upset me most was that he bought such expensive items while avoiding rent and living expenses. When Jimmy came home, I couldn't hold back. Jimmy, what is this? I asked, holding up one of the pieces of clothing. He barely glanced at me. It's my clothes. What's the problem? Why are you buying luxury brand clothes when you haven't been paying for rent or groceries? I demanded, my voice trembling with frustration. Jimmy shrugged. Why not? I can buy whatever I want with my salary. Yes, you can, I shot back. But you said we'd share expenses. You haven't paid anything in months. When will you start contributing? I'll pay when I can, he said dismissively. Isn't your priority wrong here? If I can afford luxury clothes, I'll pay rent when I'm ready. I couldn't believe his audacity. If you can afford luxury clothes, your priority should be paying the rent first. Jimmy's face twisted into annoyance. What's the big deal? We both contribute. Your salary is part of our household income, so you paying the rent is like us paying it together. It's the same thing. His words left me speechless for a moment. It's not the same, Jimmy. I'm making an effort to save while you're just buying whatever you want. Don't you care about our home? I asked, my voice rising. We had our first big fight in a while. He stormed out of the house, leaving me alone with my thoughts. Maybe we both needed some time to cool down. After Jimmy left, I couldn't let it go. I went back to his room and searched again. This time, I found a receipt for a luxury brand bag for women. The date on the receipt was from over a month ago. My birthday had passed 2 months before, and I hadn't received any such gift. At the time, we only had a simple meal at a slightly upscale restaurant, and I had paid for it. The realization hit me. Jimmy was buying gifts for someone else. Determined to know the truth, I hired a detective agency. About 3 days later, Jimmy came home acting as if nothing had happened, but I couldn't greet him the same way. No welcome back or any casual talk. He must have sensed my anger because he didn't say much either. In my mind, I was already preparing to end our marriage, depending on the results from the detective. 2 weeks later, the results came in. Jimmy had been having an affair, just as I had feared, with his ex-girlfriend. I remembered Jimmy mentioning a long-term relationship before we got married. She was the one he was seeing. The affair had been going on since last year, the same time Jimmy had started to become distant. I was filled with rage. His sudden kindness after being cold for so long? It was a ruse. He wanted me to bear all the household expenses while he spent his salary freely. I had been used, and it was unforgivable. Revenge filled my thoughts. Not long after, Jimmy came home from work and made an unbelievable proposal. My parents are going to live in this house, so can you go back to your parents' place? What are you talking about? I asked, completely baffled. Jimmy looked at me with no remorse. After our fight, I went to my parents' house. They told me to break up with you, and now they want to move in here. So I've decided to live with them, and you need to move out, he concluded. I couldn't believe my ears. You're serious? I asked, still trying to process his words. I've been paying $2,000 a month for living expenses. What will you do without me? But deep down, I knew this was a blessing in disguise. Understood, I said calmly. If that's the case, there's no fixing our relationship. I'll leave. Jimmy grinned. Good. I'll come back after you're gone. And with that, he left. The next day, I contacted a recycling company. If he thought he could throw me out, I had my own plan. A few days later, I had the recycling company come by to assess and sell all the furniture and appliances. The sale brought in hundreds of dollars. I packed my things and left from my parents' house. Jimmy had already drawn up divorce papers, so I signed them and filed them without hesitation. This was the start of our separate lives. When I informed Jimmy that I had moved out, he seemed almost cheerful. Oh, that was fast. Let's both be happy, he said before hanging up. But a few days later, Jimmy called me again, this time furious. What the hell happened to the furniture and appliances? They're gone. I sold them, I replied coldly. You can't just take them, he yelled. They were mine to begin with. All that furniture? I've had it since my single days. I already sold it. So now I have to buy new stuff? Do you know how much that'll cost me? He asked angrily. I don't care. That's your problem now, he huffed, trying to regain control. Well, I work too, you know. I can handle it, he continued. Really? I exclaimed. That apartment rent is $1,400. Plus living expenses for 3 adults will run you around $2,200 to $2,300 a month. Are you sure you can afford that? It costs that much? He stammered. Yes. That's what I've been paying all this time, I responded. Jimmy's voice faltered. I'll figure it out. And by the way, I added sharply, no more money for your girlfriend. There was a long pause before he replied. What are you talking about? I know everything, Jimmy. About your affair with your ex-girlfriend. I'll be seeking compensation, so get ready. I'll be in touch through my lawyer. Goodbye. Wait, Cassidy, he began, but I hung up before Jimmy could say anything more. Through my lawyer, I began the process of claiming compensation from Jimmy and his affair partner. In the end, Jimmy was ordered to pay $30,000. Of course, he didn't have that kind of money, so he went into debt. He couldn't even keep up with rent and living expenses. Eventually, he had to leave the apartment. His parents' house had already been sold, so they were all forced to live in a small, cheap apartment. After the divorce, Jimmy was left with nothing, and his relationship with his ex-girlfriend fell apart. He begged me for reconciliation, crying over the phone, but I ignored him and blocked his number. The compensation would be paid in installments, and if he missed a payment, his salary could be garnished. Meanwhile, I moved back in with my parents, determined to save the money I couldn't save before. The marriage was a failure, but I viewed it as a lesson, one I'd carry with me into my future. My brother's wife, Madison, looked at me seriously and began her explanation, as if it were simply common sense. Audrey is poor, uneducated, and a dropout. She's a bad influence. A junior high school dropout like her isn't someone I want around my son. That's all, she said coldly. Today, my brother's wife's perception will be turned upside down. My father, sitting nearby, didn't yet realize what was happening. "Madison, don't you know?" he said with a hint of surprise. "My daughter is... I am Audrey. I'm 30 years old. Yes, I was a delinquent in junior high school. I rebelled against everything, not just as a phase, but against the whole world. I even rebelled against the delinquent group itself. That's why I didn't take the high school entrance exam, and I started working right after junior high. Now, I'm a single mother raising a 6th grade daughter. I became pregnant when I was 18, and her father vanished the moment he found out. His job, his address, everything he told me was a lie. But after she was born, I found myself. I accepted advice, learned from my mistakes, and though I have regrets, I live happily with my daughter and my parents. My older brother, 5 years my senior, is different from me, serious and successful. He opened his own tax accounting firm 2 years ago. Even during my rebellious days, he was the only one who treated me kindly. He's married to Madison, and they have a 4-year-old son. My daughter adores her little cousin. Whenever they visit, they play together all day. This summer, my brother's family was coming home for 3 nights and 4 days, and my daughter could hardly wait. She finished her summer homework early, eager to spend time with her cousin. On the day they arrived, I stood at the door as they unloaded their luggage. My brother smiled warmly at me. "Audrey, thanks for helping out," he said. "Welcome back, brother. I'm glad you're here," I replied, but my brother sighed. "I'm really sorry, but I've got to leave after just arriving." "What?" I asked, confused. "An urgent job came up. I'll be leaving Madison and our son here, but I don't know when I'll be back. Could be a few days." I forced a smile. "That's tough. Take care." After greeting our parents, my brother left, and Madison and I waved as his car disappeared down the road. As soon as he was out of sight, Madison muttered, "Your brother sure has a hard job." But before I could respond, she quickly turned and walked inside without another word, as if I didn't exist. I sighed and followed her into the house, where her cheerful voice suddenly filled the room. "Father, Mother, thank you for having me here. My husband's gone back to work, but please let me know if you need help with anything," she uttered enthusiastically. My mother smiled. "It's okay, Madison. Just relax while you're here. Audrey is here to help, so don't worry." Madison turned to me with a forced smile. "Thank you, Audrey." I nodded. "Of course, sister-in-law." But inside, I felt the sting of her earlier coldness. Why was she acting so different in front of everyone else? Later, as the children's laughter filled the house, my mother asked me to turn on the air conditioner in the guest room upstairs. I turned on the air conditioner switch and turned around to go back to the living room. Wow! I involuntarily made a strange noise. From the entrance of the room, my sister-in-law was peering at me with a mask-like face. Horror. "I was going to turn on the air conditioner myself, but I see you already took care of it," she said. I nodded. "Mom asked me to handle it." Madison's eyes narrowed slightly as the sound of the children's laughter floated up from downstairs. "Your daughter plays with my son very well," she said, her voice neutral. I smiled. "Yes, they always have fun together." But Madison frowned. "Could you stop her from playing with him so much?" she demanded. "What?" I blinked, confused. "Why?" "It's bad for his education," she said calmly. "That's why?" I stared at her, my heart pounding. "What do you mean by that?" "Children reflect their parents," she replied, her voice sharper now. "If parents aren't normal, the children won't be either. It's my duty to protect my son from bad influences." I felt my throat tighten. "What does my education have to do with my daughter? She's a good kid," I objected firmly. Madison crossed her arms, her eyes cold. "Parents like you, high school dropouts, are a bad influence, Audrey. I don't want my son picking up on that." Her words stung like a slap. "My daughter is nothing like that. Just because I didn't finish school doesn't mean I'm a bad mother," I insisted. Madison shrugged. "I'm doing what's best for my son." I clenched my fists. "My parents have helped me raise my daughter. She's well-behaved, she's kind, and she has nothing to do with your prejudice against me," I continued. Madison raised an eyebrow. "Maybe, but I'm still keeping them apart for the rest of the visit." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I was hurt, but I was also furious. How dare she judge my daughter for my past? I was trying to live my life and raise my child the best way I could. I glared at her, unwilling to back down. You can try, I said through clenched teeth, but don't underestimate me, Madison. My daughter deserves more respect than this. She has grown up to be a smart and sensible child under the watchful eyes of my parents and me. Please don't compare me with the rebellious girl I was during puberty, I firmly added. You are free to think whatever you want, but I firmly believe that a parent's qualities are inherited by their children. It makes me shudder to think your lack of values might affect my son, my sister-in-law replied. Well, I won't tell you not to play in front of my mother-in-law, but please refrain, she added. Hey, that's rude, I snapped. I don't think so, Madison finished. Her cold tone stung, and without another word she slammed the door, leaving me alone in the hot, dark room. I stood there, speechless. My sister-in-law had shown her true colors, and I never expected her to speak like that to my face. I thought we were at least civil, but now she dragged children into adult matters, and that made me angry. The sound of the air conditioner starting up was loud, but it couldn't drown out the hurt I felt. It stung the most when she insulted my daughter. As I wiped away my tears and the sweat on my forehead, I decided to hold my head high. The next day, despite everything, my daughter and nephew played happily together, like nothing had happened. My sister-in-law occasionally shot me a look, as if she wanted to say something, but I ignored her. I didn't want to bring adult prejudices into the children's innocent lives. I spent the day making sure I wasn't alone with her. After dinner, I came out of the bathroom only to find my sister-in-law waiting outside the door, her eyes bloodshot. I had been avoiding her all day, but now there was no escaping her confrontation. Your daughter is too close to my son, she hissed. What's going on? I sighed, already exhausted. Your son was the one who asked to play this morning. They should have stopped at a reasonable time, but they're good friends. They still want to play, I explained. Good friends, she sneered. Don't get the wrong idea. My son's just being nice. He's only hanging out with her because he's kind. Maybe so, I said, struggling to keep calm. But they've been playing together for a while. It's not like my daughter is a burden to him. This is why idiots like you are impossible to deal with, Madison spat. I might be an idiot, I shot back, but my daughter isn't. If the parent is an idiot, then the child must be an idiot too, my sister-in-law retorted viciously. She's even trying to seduce a boy who's barely out of diapers. What? I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Seduce? Are you out of your mind? My 6th grade daughter is trying to seduce a 4-year-old boy? What kind of nonsense is that? I was incredibly indignant. You're the stupid one, she screamed, her voice rising. You're a low-educated, poor single mother who's gone crawling back to her parents. You're a disgrace to your family, my sister-in-law concluded. Poor, I echoed, trying to stay composed. My son started attending a private kindergarten this year. It's an elite school with children from families of doctors, CEOs, politicians. We've created a good environment for him, but trash like you and my husband's family drag us down. Madison continued to accuse, not slowing her pace. Trash? I said, my voice shaking with anger. Trash is that scumbag who got me pregnant and disappeared. You don't know anything about the real world. Can you even raise your son with that kind of attitude? Are you worried he'll call you a bitch one day? Or worse when he grows up? I snapped. My son would never say something like that, she fumed. I'll make sure he chooses the right partner, unlike your daughter. That's terrifying, I replied, my patience gone. You think you can control everything, even your son's future partner? It's going to hurt your children in the long run. I've had enough, my sister-in-law screamed hysterically. I'm cutting ties with idiots like you. You're beneath us. Have you two finished talking? A voice cut through the tension like a knife. We both froze as my father-in-law stepped into the hallway, his face stern. My sister-in-law quickly tried to compose herself, her tone shifting. Father, we were just... I heard everything from the living room, he said coldly. The grandchildren are surprised by all this shouting. Why did the conversation go in this direction? Well, my sister-in-law stammered, trying to find the right words. It's because she's a junior high school dropout. If the parent is an idiot, the child must be an idiot too, So I don't want my son associating with them anymore, she tried to explain. Madison, my father-in-law said, his voice low and dangerous. What exactly do you mean by that? He looked at her intently. I didn't mean anything bad, she said quickly, panicking. I just want my son to play with kids on his level, that's all. Father stared at her, unblinking. I knew that look. Those eyes were terrifying when he was angry. I remembered being lectured with those eyes during my own rebellious years. My sister-in-law, clearly flustered, kept talking, trying to cover her tracks. I don't mean to insult you or mother-in-law, she babbled. I just want the best for my son. So you're willing to insult my daughter and granddaughter instead? He asked sharply. My son deserves better company, she insisted. Audrey's poor, uneducated, and backward. She's fallen behind. Father's expression hardened. You've spoken enough, but let me tell you something. My daughter isn't poor. She runs her own company. My sister-in-law blinked, stunned. What? She exclaimed. Yes, he continued. Audrey is the president of a web-related company. She built it from the ground up. I spoke up, confirming it. I started out as a web designer, and after working my way up, I started my own company. It wasn't easy, but I've been running it successfully ever since my daughter entered elementary school. The room went silent. My sister-in-law's face turned pale as she realized how wrong she had been. Although it was tough, the company has been growing steadily and now has an annual revenue of $150,000. If I ever want to leave home, I can do so at any time. I'm not poor at all. There's something else I need to add, I said, pausing for effect. I lent my brother the money he needed to start his business. It's better than borrowing from a bank, don't you think? My sister-in-law frowned. Huh? I haven't heard anything about that from your brother. What? Your family, right? I exclaimed in surprise. You're self-employed, so you should know something about work. Don't act like you don't know. Madison sighed. You're annoying. I'm busy with my son's education, she shot back, frustration creeping into her voice. He has lessons every day. Musicals, art museums, exhibitions. It's an education in aesthetics. You haven't even been to an art museum, she added, cutting me off with a smirk. I didn't rise to the bait. I don't go to every exhibition. I go once a semester with the Board of Education. Oh, Audrey is being called out now, how sad, my sister-in-law sneered. It's already incoherent, but my sister-in-law still bites on my words. My father, who had been silent until now, suddenly raised his voice, his frustration finally boiling over. Enough already. Don't you understand how it feels to have your own child insulted? He asked angrily. My sister-in-law's face fell, and for a moment, she looked like she regretted her words. I went to the Board of Education, I said, trying to calm the room down, with a petition a few years ago. I asked for obstetricians and gynecologists to teach at junior high schools. I regretted my ignorance and wanted students to have the education I didn't. Now I organize special classes. My sister-in-law looked surprised when she heard this. I made peace signs with both hands towards her. You're misunderstanding me, big sister. Just because I dropped out of school doesn't mean I've done anything wrong, I continued. She crossed my arms. Don't talk about housewives as if they're villains. Her face twisted with anger. I'll be leaving now. She spat the words out, grabbed her nephew, and stormed out of the room. My nephew tugged at his mother's sleeve. Mommy, I heard what you were saying, and my big sister cried. She said that if she played with me, she'd become stupid. You shouldn't use stupid as a bad word. That's what the kindergarten teacher said, he uttered. Shut up, she snapped, her voice rising. Be quiet, we're leaving. After they left, I found my daughter crying in the corner of the living room. I hugged her tightly. I'm sorry, sweetie. It was scary and unpleasant, wasn't it? But it's okay now. You don't deserve to be treated like that, I tried to reassure her. My daughter sniffled and shook her head. I'm crying because I'm frustrated, not scared. I won't forgive anyone who says mean things about my wonderful mom, she concluded. Her words caught me by surprise. Thank you, I whispered, holding her tighter. I'm so proud of you. Later that evening, my brother came over to collect his wife's belongings and apologized. By then, both my parents and I had cooled down. Well, I suppose I said too much, I admitted. And I shouldn't have shouted, my father added. My mother asked, what's going on with Madison now? My brother sighed. She's excited about something. Starting her own company, actually. She has this strange confidence now, thinking if Audrey can be president, she can too. I raised an eyebrow. That stubborn and overbearing personality of hers? I always knew she put a lot of effort into education, he continued, but I didn't think she'd go so far as to start her own business. She wants to control everything, even our son's education. She insists parents should choose and manage everything for their kids. Well, I think children should be free to explore their own interests, I retorted. My brother nodded. Yeah, we fight about that all the time. I worry about your family's future, my father said softly. Meanwhile, my daughter refused to speak to my brother the entire time he was there. She just ate the sweets he brought. But after a while, she relented, coming out to see him off. Feeling better? I asked her afterward. She nodded. Uncle was pitiful with the way I treated him, wasn't he? But someone had to act mad, or it wouldn't have felt right. I blinked. Did you really think about it like that? She smiled. Of course. I was stunned by her maturity. Children really do grow up in ways we don't always notice. 3 years later, my daughter became a third-year junior high school student, and she entered high school by recommendation. I was relieved she was on a different path than mine. I didn't want her to face the same hardships I did. As for my sister-in-law, her business failed miserably. Despite her efforts, misunderstandings with suppliers and bad choices, like renting a large, expensive store, led to its downfall. She returned to her parents' home, a recluse, blaming my brother and me for her failures. My brother, tired of her stubbornness, is now in divorce mediation. Next weekend, he and my nephew are coming over. Instead of staying at my parents' house, I plan to invite them to my home. For the sake of their son, I've been trying to help out. My daughter has grown into a strong young woman. I realize now it's time for me to focus on more than just raising her. My parents are getting older, and they'll need help soon. I've relied on them since I graduated from junior high school, but now it's my turn to be the one they can rely on.